Welcome back to part 2 of our test scores exercise, and we're going to pick up with creating a list and using some built-in functions to interact with that list and make things a little more efficient as we work. And what we're going to do now is we're going to make a list. And what it says here is we're going to put the same numbers in a list. And a list, we're just going to give it a name and put it in square brackets. This will make a list. So we can delete our original variables in here. And I guess we could leave these numbers here. I don't know how hard this will be. I'm just going to try and backspace here, backspace, and put a comma, because they're going to all be in the list. So you could do this. This might save a little time. It might not. And I'll put a comma, and then putting a comma in between. All these have to have a comma in between. And I'll put a comma. I have 6 in my list. I guess I'll get rid of that last one, since I'll try to follow what's on the sheet. Now we're going to make a list here, and what I'm going to call it, it's a special variable, and this variable is a list of, it could be a list of strings, and this happens to be a list of integers, numbers. And again, integers don't have decimals. They're just kind of regular numbers like this, so they don't have decimals. Now, we did get a decimal printout when we came up with our average. That's what's called a float, but these are just integers. So I'm going to call this list tests. And just like any variable, I'll say tests equal, and I'll just put square brackets around these things here. Now, I don't have to put spaces in here if I don't want to. Now we have this stuff going on here. Although I'm going to get rid of all this code because we just got rid of all those variables. So instead of having 6 variables, 5 variables, all those different variables, now we just have numbers in a list. And this will be a lot easier to update. So I'm going to just get rid of this. And you might say, well, what's going in this average thing? And we're going to use some other built-in functions just to kind of experiment a little bit. Here's 2 built-in functions. One is called len and one is called sum. And we're going to take the length of tests, and then we're going to get the sum of tests. Now we are going to make variable names that equal that. Then we could do math with that stuff. So len and sum are 2 other functions that we're going to use. So just to review, we used a round function, we used a print function. Now we're going to use a len function, and you could put spaces in here if you want to separate it a little bit. I'll put len, and then I'll say tests, because that's what we're going to run the len function on. Now when we run this function, len tests, it'll give me the length of that. Now what do you think the length is? The length is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 items in there, so the length of that list is going to be 5. Now we're going to make a variable that holds that value of 5. So that's why we're going to call this num tests. We'll just use num because that's what we're going to use to be the number of tests. We'll call it num tests, and then we'll say equals the length of tests. So what this variable should be is 5. And I'm going to do another one. There's another built-in one we're going to do. It's called sum. And you can see it's showing up in purple. And then if I do the same thing, we're going to take the sum of tests. And what that'll do is add all this stuff up without having to do 97 plus 93 plus 75 plus 81 plus 53. It'll just take the sum of all the numbers in the list. And obviously they have to be integers for this to work. And we're also going to use a variable here because we're going to do other math. So we want to kind of hold that value and take it on and then make an average from it. So that's why we're using variables to represent these functions. So whatever value comes from these functions, we want to hold it somewhere. So what's going to hold that is going to be sum tests. We're going to make a variable. Now you could call this anything you want. You don't have to call it sum test. You could call it st if you want, as long as it's something that you know. But I'm just calling it sum tests and num tests because that makes sense to me. A lot of times you want to use variable names that make sense to you, that you remember, because you could get away from it and come back and be like, what was st? I mean, I don't even know what that was. So you want to have these make some sense. And also if other people look at your code, they want to be able to say, oh, you're getting the number of the test dividing by the sum test, and they'll kind of figure it out. So after you get those values here, and you could even use something called comments. You go here and say gets the number of items in list. Now I know it's getting long here. I'll just put number of items in list. That way it won't go all the way across here. But number of items in list, that's this stuff up here. That's just that's like little notes to yourself. So comments can be like little notes to yourself. So I'll go here and put in, adds up items in list. That kind of tells you what's happening here. This is the number of items in the list. This adds up the items in the list. That's what's happening there with sum tests. So these are comments. They don't print out. They're like little notes that are to you so you can know that. Or if you share it with other programmers, they'll see that and know what that means. And I'll know it. If you share code with me, I'll know what it means here. So sometimes that helps. You could go here and even put something like, test scores. But you have to start it off with the pound sign. Now we still have to figure out the average. Now you remember how to do the average before we added things together and then we divided by the number of items in the list. Now we have both of those things here. We have all the things together, which are sum tests, divided by, and then the number of items in the list is num tests. And we're not getting any red wavy lines, so we're using these variables here from these functions. So this variable is pulling the length from that function, this variable is pulling the sum from that function, and now we're just doing math with these two values. And you could have called this n and s. That would be short too. Then you wouldn't have to type all these things. Sometimes I have problems typing these tests. I'm getting the t's and the s's messed up when I type them. But that way, we're just doing that. And then this still works the same way. Everything else is still the same. And we run it like that. And we're still getting 79.8. The nice thing about this, and the reason we're doing this here, and again, I promise you, we're going to do more fun stuff than just putting numbers together. But if you went in here and added another one, just like before I added 77, and last time when I added 77, I had to add another variable, and then I had to go and change it in the list. I had to make the a plus b plus c plus e, and then add an f at the end or whatever. Or I had to add a t6 because I was using t1 and t2 and t3 and t4 and t5 and t6, and I had to add those in there. Then I had to change the number and make sure that I made that. And that's ripe for error doing stuff like that, because if you're making a lot of changes, you're going to screw something up. But in this one right here, we're making one change. We're saying, okay, here's a new test, and we're going to run it. And now it's 79.3. And now if let's say I got 100 on my last one, I'll run it. And now I'm up to an 82.3 because now it's updating them. Because it's running a function here and it's getting the length of them, it's always knowing that this is 7 of these. And it's adding all this up. You could even print out what they are. If you're not sure of what they're doing, you could go down here and print. You could print num tests. And then you could also print out sum tests. Now, you may not need this, but you may want to kind of just make sure it's working okay, or even know what the numbers are. So if you run this, it's going to print out that percentage, and it's also telling you that 7 numbers and 576, just if you want to test it. If you want to go here and put a 95, and then if you run it, now that it's doing 8, it's 671. So it's giving you a total of all of these. Not that you really need that, but it's telling you how many tests there are. That's what's kind of nice about variables, is that now we're just changing things in one place. And that's what we're going to learn to do with programming, be more efficient so that when we make changes like this, we don't have to go change it in 3 different places. So if I go here, the last thing we're going to do here before the little extra credit thing, and again, I added different numbers here. I didn't use the same numbers that I'm showing here. But this last thing here, it's a print statement, and it's actually a string, and it incorporates variables inside the string. So we're saying the average of so many tests is average percent. So let's do that, and I could just look at it here. But what we're going to do, instead of just printing the average, I'm going to go here and print something else. I'll go inside here, and I'll just backspace and make sure I start off with empty parentheses, and I'll put 2 quotes here. Notice if I just do shift quote, it puts 2 for me. So it knows that you want a pair of quotes. And what I'm going to say is the average of how many tests, and I'm just going to put curly braces here, is, and then I'm going to put curly braces, something percent. And I could just put a period, I guess. So the average of so many tests is percent. Now, what we're going to do in these curly braces is we're going to put the variable. So the average of num tests, because that's how many there are, and I'll stretch this out a little bit so I don't have to make it break right now. But the average of num tests is what? It's average. That's what it's going to be. So the number that comes up is going to be in here, and the number of tests is going to be in here. Now, this won't work until we actually, if we printed this out right now, watch what happens. It says, it prints out the average of num tests. Tests is average. So it printed out exactly what I did in quotes, because that's a string. But if we just do this, watch this little trick. We put an F here. Now when we put an F here, it magically reads these things. See, the color changed when I did that. This is called an F string formatting, and what it magically did was it now reads these as variables, and it's going to substitute the variable in here where we have those curly braces. That's what this F does. And notice the F is outside the quote here. That's called an F string. And it's just a way of formatting that you can basically put variables inside a string or inside a sentence. So now if I run this, it says the average of 8 tests is 83.9. And you could keep adding things to here. You could put a 56 and see how that affected my grade. And now the average of 9 tests is 80.8. So you could keep doing that. So it makes it a lot more efficient that you can just throw a number up here and it's updating through here because we're using variables. So that's kind of the magic of variables, that you keep using them throughout your code, so you only have to edit things in one place. It's more efficient if you can edit things in one place and not have to do it in a bunch of places, because you're going to screw it up if it's in a bunch of places. Now, I don't necessarily need these here anymore. I could see that it's updating the right number, so I don't need those, and that's all I really need for this one here. And when you're done, you don't have to save it. You can just go to Share, and skip this thing here, skip this, and scroll down, and you're actually going to copy the link from here. You're going to click on here and copy the link. And one thing to point out, when I click off of here, this is the same link in your URL up here. You can actually copy this too, and we're going to paste it into our comment into My Warren. So let me go to My Warren, and I'm going to go into coursework, and I'm going to go down to Unit 9, and I'm going to find this exercise, and I'm going to click right on this, right on the link. And then we're just going to add a comment like we've been doing, and insert a link like we've been doing, and just paste it here. And that's what the URL should look like. So that's the same URL that's up here, and that's fine. That's your URL, and it will have your username in the URL, which will help me find your files in case something gets messed up with it. And then make sure that you choose New Window here, and then hit OK. And that's it. And that's all you have to do for that one. That was pretty easy, and it wasn't a whole lot of fun because we were just messing around with numbers and variables, but it was just a little introduction to Python. We're going to start working with turtles after this, but I just wanted to do some very basic vanilla Python first, just to get you used to some print functions, some variables, and updating our code a little bit to make it a little more efficient. Now, I'm going to record one more video just for the extra credit part if anybody wants to do that, but you don't have to do that, but I'm going to have that as the next video.